The Chalke History Festival special series on history with Jackson.
Right, so hello and welcome to the History of Jackson podcast, where we're at Chalke History Festival and joined by Anne Sebba. How are you doing, Anne?
I'm absolutely fine. How could you not be in this gorgeous place?
Oh, this is one of my favourite places
Yeah.
in the world every summer.
It's not only beautiful, but it's dedicated to the subject that's closest to my heart, and all the people queuing, it just makes you feel wonderful. There's
really
such a
does.
love for history.
There's probably no greater concentration of historians in the world.
Yeah. So we feel at home, yes. Lovely,
So
thanks.
today at Chalke, you're talking about your new book.
I am indeed.
And I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to write that book?
The Women's Orchestra of
Yeah.
Auschwitz. Well, there's a sort of longer tale to this. I've always been interested in the Holocaust. How could I not be? I grew up in 1951. Both my parents had come back from serving, so it was very much part of my childhood, and yet you didn't talk about it and you didn't think about it. But I feel, and have felt for a long time, that if you don't deal with the central calamity of the 20th century, you can't really call yourself a modern historian. That's what the last century was about. But I didn't really know the right way in, and I felt I'm not a survivor, I'm not the child of survivors, so there's also this worrying aspect: what right do I have to tell a story that doesn't directly concern me? Well, I've now concluded, A, that it does directly concern all of us because of the long shadows, but there was a specific moment which I'm getting to. So I was researching Belsen in the Wiener Library. I've always felt that Belsen actually should be a much stronger part of the British historical psyche than it is. If you ask people about the British role in World War II, they'll say Dunkirk, probably.
Yeah.
And Dunkirk was actually a failure dressed up as a great British success story. I know there was D-Day and other things, but Belsen, it seems to me, was a British triumph because British soldiers went into this appalling camp. British soldiers, British medics. It was the Brits who had to bring it under control, to deal with these thousands of displaced people, as they were now being called, to deal with not only the Germans and the Nazis and how many people they would be able to put on trial, but also to deal with this swelling magnitude of sick and ill people who had suffered in the camps. And they did it. They brought it under control somehow or other. So here I was researching Belsen, where I knew my father as a tank commander had been, but I didn't know his precise role. And in researching Belsen, I found that on May the 24th, the Red Cross had organised a concert for the remnants of the Women's Orchestra of Auschwitz, those who had survived, the Jewish women who were brought there. And on May the 24th, when I finally researched my father's story, I found that he was in charge of setting fire to the lice-ridden huts of Belsen. And the two dates coinciding meant that I had to write about this story. So it gave me permission, it gave me a way in.
And I think that's a really nice connection for you as a historian, to try and bring yourself closer to it, because I think when you have events like this which are so dark, it's hard to kind of put yourself in the mind of people who are there and witnessing it.
Listen, this is not a book about my father. I think there's one paragraph, and I at some point I even reduced that to a footnote because I did not want it to be about me or my father. It's about these extraordinary women, about 45 or 50 of them, who are the unsung heroines. Nobody would know about them. They were ordinary people. They were girls. I mean, I call it grandly the Women's Orchestra of Auschwitz because that's the name history has given to it. But actually, they called themselves the Girls' Band. But I just have to believe, and my father died 30 years ago, so I can't ask him, like many of that generation, he wouldn't talk about it. He was just a minor player. He didn't feel he'd been part of the liberation. He arrived later. But I am convinced he trod the same path, having destroyed the huts. Where did he go that night of the concert? He must have listened to it. So it's kept me going throughout the research that he must have been there. So in a way, it's my sort of small-scale homage to him, but it's a much bigger homage to these women who survived.
So how did these women come together to form this band?
Well, long story, as I'm going to be telling today. But in 1943, really, there was a Nazi female guard called Maria Mandel. And Maria Mandel was having an affair with a Nazi architect and thought that this would make her look more cultured in his eyes. There were always power grabs amongst the Nazi female guards and male guards, but the women were never given the same authority as the men. So she thought if she could have her own orchestra of women, and there were several male orchestras, that she would look good in his eyes, that it would mean a step up for her in terms of authority. And really, hitherto, the only way for the women to have more authority was to be more brutal or more sadistic. So, although she was hanged in 1948 and she did not deserve to live, I seriously feel that her sadism and brutality was second to none. This is the one bright spark in her life in which she enabled these other women to live. She found an extraordinary conductor called Alma Rosé. Alma Rosé was the niece of Gustav Mahler. She was musical royalty, and when she came to the camp, she was about to be experimented on, these appalling pseudo-scientific experiments for fertility, and she probably would have died on the operating table, but she was given a last request. Her last request was a violin. She played magnificently, and Mandel offered her her life in exchange for running an orchestra. So how it worked was that as the young Jewish women and non-Jewish women arrived in Auschwitz, because there were a few Polish Catholic teachers as well who were given a chance to play in the orchestra, and word of mouth quickly spread that this was a chance to live, a chance of life. So everybody wanted to be part of the orchestra. There were other ways of possibly surviving Auschwitz, other commandos as they were called. You could work in the laundry, in the office, in the camp kitchen, in the warehouse full of riches, which was known as Canada. But somehow the orchestra, although it was not a soft option, they worked incredibly hard. They didn't get better food, they didn't get really better privileges, but they had hope. They had a bed to themselves, they had access to lose, small privileges like that. And Alma Rosé really worked them hard. She only lived for 8.5 months. So everybody in the orchestra was spared the gas chambers, but Alma herself died of food poisoning. Who knows? I think she was deliberately poisoned. I think people were jealous of her. But once people heard there was an orchestra, if they had any musical training at all, they quickly auditioned for it.
No, and I can imagine what that kind of does in that situation if you're able to try and save your own life by getting involved. But being part of that orchestra and these women being together, how does that affect their relationships?
Yeah, well, that's really interesting because, of course, when it came to playing together, they pulled together and they managed. But actually, there were squabbles. And that's one of the things I found really hardest to know whether I should write about it. Well, I didn't really find it hard because I knew that truth has to come above everything else. And so as soon as I discovered that even anti-Semitism surfaced in amongst the orchestra women in the block, I did think for a minute, should I really not be writing about this? Should I show that these were wonderfully sisterly moments, and there were sisterly moments where they helped tune each other's instruments and looked after each other if they fell sick. But also there were terrible moments amongst the Polish Catholics who had food parcels. Now the Jewish women were not allowed to receive anything, and anyway there was nobody left at home who could send them food or any kind of sustenance. But the Polish Catholic women decided they wouldn't share them with the Jews because they didn't deserve it. So all those things were difficult, but I felt ultimately I've got to paint a true picture of what it was like. And although it was a story of sisterhood and small kindnesses and helping each other when the really big moments mattered, nonetheless, when it broke down, it was horrific for me to contemplate what it was actually like and the squabbles. There were 11 nations, and even amongst the Jewish women, there were Zionists, there were anti-Zionists, there were atheists, there were Orthodox women. Think of all the languages that were spoken. It was a Tower of Babel. And for the Greek women who only spoke this sort of ancient dialect Ladino, they really had nobody to talk to. The main language was German, French and German. So you needed some kind of understanding or you were at sea. It was not straightforward, but ultimately they survived.
I think you're showing the complexity of this history, and I think that's what's really nice about history. It's not just black and white. There's complexity to it. But I can also see that you were incredibly moved when writing this book. How has it impacted you as a historian?
Listen, as I said, I grew up in the 1950s. I'm Jewish. There's never been a time when I didn't know about the camps. I had visited 5 camps before I visited Auschwitz because I had this wrong idea that Auschwitz was actually a tourist trap and I didn't need to go there. I did need to go there. I'm passionate now. I think everybody should go there because the scale of suffering is extraordinary. The industrial scale of killing has to be seen to be believed. So you can't write this book and not be impacted by how the human spirit ultimately decides that life is beautiful when you've seen so much that would, to me, make me feel life isn't worth living. But actually for these women, they decided that human life is worth living. So I think it's made me a more optimistic person in a way, because as you look at these women, the reason that they survived, what gave them the desire to triumph over it. And in my view, they are all heroines. They're heroines because they resisted in the biggest possible way they could. They survived. And given that the Nazis were trying to exterminate not only Jews but Jewish culture, actually the human spirit is pretty strong, the desire to live. And life, I think, is beautiful in spite of all the awfulness and horrendous suffering and abuse. They nonetheless decided they wanted normality, they wanted children, they wanted to live. So I think that's what it's taught me.
I think that's a really, really nice positive note there for you as a historian, as a person, and someone who, you know, as someone who's got a slight connection with it for your father as well. Now I've got a final fun question for you, as we do for every guest on the podcast. Now, this Chalke History Festival is one of my favourite events of the year. What's your favourite thing about Chalke?
I think seeing your readers. That's what's so great. I mean, none of us write for our books just to go into bookshops behind a shelf with the spine the wrong way round and nobody read, but to communicate in this way. I actually love talking, and I think talking is telling your story with pictures, because not all the pictures I'm going to show are in the book. So for me, it's being able to show the pictures of these women, to communicate with my readers. I mean, what's not to like? What's not to love, I should say.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And talking's one of the best things we can do in our lives. So
and thank you for having this interview,
worry.
and it's telling the story in a different way. So
I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, thank you.
The Chalke History Festival special series on history with Jackson.